Welcome to the Metamorphosis podcast, where we explore the possibilities and processes of personal and community transformation based on the ancient wisdom of Kemet, one of many classical African civilizations, as a foundation. I am Dr. Catherine Lynn Adams, an associate professor of African and African American Studies at Claflin University, where I teach courses on oral and literary traditions of the Africana world, with an emphasis on interviewing and archiving the stories of our elders. I am serving as a scribe for this project. Joining me is Baba Derrick Jackson. Baba Derrick is the priest and thought leader of Christ Universal Temple, a spiritual community in South Carolina. In the year 2000, the temple was established as an African-centered, faith-based organization to help individuals, families, and communities to achieve their full spiritual, economic, social, and educational potential. In each episode, I will ask Baba Derrick to talk about a singular topic related to spirituality, theology, community building, human relationships, and African consciousness. This is a journey to document and preserve more than 2 decades of work. We invite you to like and subscribe to receive notifications for future episodes. Thank you for listening. In this episode, we find out why the use of the title Baba and not Father. We hear some words of wisdom from the priesthood. And I ask Baba, how might someone get started on the path of study? So there are absolutely people who know you as Derrick Jackson. And then there are people who know you, and then also people who know you as Baba Derrick.
Yeah.
And to maybe have you say something, kind of walk us through who is Derrick Jackson versus Baba Derrick Jackson.
Only reason why I'm laughing is some years ago in talking with Joe and Bernie, and we were sitting around talking about our own particular stories, right? How we grew up, different places we have been, and it was just one of those conversations. I think we were waiting on something, and it just got around to that. And I was saying to them, I know what era you know me by the name you call me. So when you said that, that's why I started smiling. Because if you call me Big D, then more than likely you knew me in my childhood. Right? If you called me Papa D, then more than likely you knew me through my military time. Right? And so now, if you call me Baba, you know me since I became a priest. And that's kind of how I measure people who know me and what time period they knew me. Now, that doesn't mean some people like Bernie doesn't say Big D, but that was because Bernie was calling me that before I became Baba. That was just a nickname Bernie chose to give me, and that's really how I date people. I got a friend in New York that I grew up with. Whenever he calls, it's "What's up, Big D?"
Can you say something about why you are Baba and not Father coming through the priesthood?
That was interesting how I got that title. because the other priests were called father. And, you know, being around people that asked that and reading the material I was reading, going to the conferences I was going, somehow being called father was just not working for me. I didn't see, I didn't see myself in that role, being called father. So I went to the Archbishop and told him that at my
The ordination?
the ordination ceremony, that because that's when you get that title, right? It's bestowed on you. Please put the title Baba on me. Don't put father. I looked up the key Swahili word, and it could mean father, but it also means leader. You know, and when I saw it, I said I'd much rather that um, that name. So when he did the ordination ceremony, he said that, you know, from now on, call him Baba Derrick. He will be known as Baba Derrick Jackson. But he told me, because of the way that they had been designated with the IRS, he had to, I needed to put the word reverend on paperwork. But once I walked away from them, that designation, I didn't have to worry about it anymore, of reverend. And he said, use it as often as you can until people get used to calling you by that name. He said, because they knew you by your nickname, they knew you by your first name, and it's going to take time for people to adjust. He said, but don't worry, they will. Time will help them to adjust. So now I have people, when I'm in different settings, depending on the setting, have trouble calling me just Derrick. You know, which sometimes I prefer, because when they call me, use the designation Baba, it takes me out of character. Meaning, I want the relationship to be equal. I don't want that hierarchy relationship, and people will automatically do it just by saying Baba. So I find that interesting now, that now I've turned the table back to say I don't want that designation in certain circles.
We talked a little bit about the African American congregation in the Catholic Church, but I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you wanted to share about your training in the priesthood?
Here's what I just recently shared with someone who is now a provost at a Catholic institution, good friend of mine, who became provost at a private Catholic college in Seattle, Washington. And one of the things, of the many things I shared with her, is you're about to find out how well the Catholic Church copied Kemetic structure. I said, don't let it be surprised by it. Just know I'm giving you a heads up to look for it. Says, notice all of the priests, and I was just sharing this with Bernie just the other day. Says all the priests in the Catholic Church have a specialty where they're college trained. They're not just theologically trained. They are trained in as doctors. They're trained as lawyers. They're trained to all aspects of society have people who are trained and skilled within those different disciplines. And I said, if you look at the structure of Kemetic priests, they were all well educated, trained in many different areas of Kemetic life. So is the Catholic priest. And there were hierarchies within the priesthood. If you look around certain temples and stuff like that, but they had definite designations, not based on what's the word? I have some dominance over you, but your position based on what that particular thing meant to the society. Like a ritual priest has a designation that's very high, because of what rituals meant to the society, and so then you might have priests, what we would call today of music and rhythm, sound, and all of that. But that didn't make the ritual priest any better than the person who may be doing rhythm and sounds and stuff like that. They had to be skilled at whatever it was they were a priest of. And I said, that's what the Catholic Church borrowed. Now, Catholic Church did a whole different thing than Kemet, but it borrowed the idea of having people who have some expertise in in different fields that the society calls for, where you don't see that in a lot of your Protestant movements. In fact, in a lot of your Protestant movements, you find the minister might have had a calling, but that's it. And then once he's ordained into the movement, he doesn't have to go back and study anything. Where within the Catholics, you've got to bring something to the table. Now, just because in the Catholic Church you are called bishop or cardinal or monsignor, guarantee you, each one of them, when you pull back that layer of monsignor and bishop and cardinal, they had a particular expertise somewhere, whether it was in political science, whether it was in law, whether it was in education, guaranteed. Or you can't be a priest. Now, you don't have to have had it before you become a priest, but you're required to figure it out as you're going through the priesthood as to what you're going to study. And then they will assign you accordingly.
And so for you, what was your area of study?
They brought me in because of my understanding of my art. And when I look back now, that was so rudimentary. Ooh, Lord, how did I get away with that? Because I was still very young. And I had a particular way of looking at it. I guess that's what they were looking at. And I've always seen my art through the eyes of relationships. And that's what they were respecting at that time, is looking at my art through relationships.
I asked you this in another session, but I'm wondering if somebody wanted to know more, study more about Ma'at, What would you suggest the starting point be?
Wow, that's a heavy question because, and I think I would answer that this way. It would have to be the level of what they already know, not necessarily about my art in and of itself, but just what have you read that might make that distinction for me as to which way I would send you. It depends on, after asking you some other questions, as to where I would begin to tell you. There's a small book by Malana Karinga, one of the first books he wrote on ancient Kemet, called The Book of Coming Forth by Day. It's a small book, but it's a powerful book for a person who has some knowledge of ancient Africa, but may not be specific into Ma'at. There's a book by Ashby on the 42 Declarations of Innocence, I believe. Ashby wrote that one. It's actually, I keep my stuff real close to me. It's actually called The 42 Precepts of Ma'at and the Foundation in the Wisdom Text. And then there is the Teachings of Ptah Hotep by Asa Hilliard. Oh, Ancient Egyptian Essays by Jacob Carruthers would be definitely in that list.
What about for the person who is listening to this podcast and Ma'at is very new?
Ooh. I would ask, have they read Anthony Browder's book, Now Valley Contributions to Civilization? Not because of my art that's in there, because he only really touches on it, but to give them a basic background to be reading stuff from Kemet before I give them the books I just named. You know, it's sort of getting your feet wet before I throw you in the water of Kemet, and then I might recommend, depending on who the person is, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. Another way to get your feet wet so that you're thinking in a certain kind of way. Because as you know, Dr. Adams, part of studying our ancestors, you have to develop a different way of thinking to bring that European education and mindset into African understanding. It's going to mess you up every time. You're going to become confused about concepts and ideas. So you I have to find ways to break the way you think about something away from the way that our ancestors thought about something, or as you would say in Africana studies, ways of knowing. That there is a distinct difference in their ways of knowing.
I'm curious, how often when you recommend books to people, do you find that they come back to you having read those books?
Very few. Very few. And that can be somewhat disappointing. Early on, it was very disappointing But I understand a little bit more now. You get a little bit older and you get a little bit wiser, and you realize people are on their own journeys. And sometimes it may be 5 years later that they come back and say, um, ah, I know you had pointed me in this direction to read this book, but I couldn't read it then. I'm reading it now. And can you help me get through through this book? I said, well, I'm glad to help you. I'll help you any way I can. I'm just glad you picked it up and that you decided you were at a place where you thought you needed to read it. And it's usually because somebody else exposed them to it. And then they'll say, well, didn't Baba Derrick tell me about that book some years back? And now I don't find myself having to come to that place. And so that happens a lot. I'm sure as a teacher, you find that out too.
Definitely. Definitely.
That you drop things on students that they don't get while they're in your classroom. Where they'll write you back some years later and say, oh, thank you, Dr. Adams. I wish I had read that book when I was in your class.
And with that said, I will say stay tuned for our next episode. We want to archive something special that was established in 2000, more than 2 decades ago. We will be uploading episodes on the 14th and the 28th of each month. In upcoming episodes, we will be exploring the history of Christ Universal Temple, its teachings on spirituality and personal growth, and its role in the Columbia, South Carolina community. We invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to receive notifications for future episodes. Thank you for listening.